Okay.
All right, we're rolling. Let's see.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jenny Matz. It's Tuesday, November 14th, 2017, and it's my great honor to be interviewing Don King at the SNL Studio 8H control room at 30 Rock in New York City.
And action.
So, Don, what was your name at birth?
Donald Roy King.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Pitcairn, Pennsylvania, a little railroad town right outside of Pittsburgh in 1947. And I was blessed in lots of ways, primarily that I had the two greatest parents one could imagine. A dad who was a mailman and a happy, he was known as the Whistling Mailman, and he then moved up to become the postmaster of Pitcairn and moved on beyond that as well. My mom took care of me and my two younger brothers, and I am here in this studio because of the two of them. They taught me lessons that have paid off in every imaginable way. My dad, when I was about 7, I think, took me aside and said, "Don, you're probably going to be short. I'm short, and Mom's really short, and you probably will be too. You don't know how lucky you are." He said, "For some reason, the teachers call on the tall kids first, and the coaches put the big kids into the game first. But when they find out that you know the answers too, and when they find out that you can throw just as far as those big kids, and you can run fast, maybe a little faster than they can, they will be doubly impressed. And so you'll have double the advantage because you're just a little tinier and overlooked at first." He was right, and that's been so valuable to me over all of these years. A couple of weeks ago, I was blessed to win an Emmy, and I got up on a stage and I said, "This will be short." I've never had a problem being short.
Besides from those fortunate genes, were there other traits you think you inherited from your parents?
My mom taught me a strong work ethic. And it was pretty simple. It was you show up on time, you do what you're asked to do, you do it as well as you can, you offer to do more, and you don't complain. And that too has served me well, I think. And it's no entitlement, no sense of I deserve something that I see somebody else get. I just do the job, and the work comes first.
Did you have a television set growing up, and did you watch TV?
It was a black and white set, and we watched occasionally. My mom was pretty strict about the hours we could watch, and we weren't allowed to read comic books, but we were allowed to watch some television. And we loved Superman, the Steve Reeves version, and I remember one year for Halloween, the three of us dressed as Superman with black capes and white shirts with an S that my mom had drawn on the white T-shirts. And then when the Christopher Reeve movie came out in the 70s, I saw it in a theater. I was shocked. I said, "I can't believe they screwed around with that iconic costume. He's in blue and red, and Superman was in black and gray." That's only because I'd only seen black and white television. I'd never seen the comic book. I had no idea that the costume really was red and blue. But I wasn't a super television nerd. A lot of kids I knew just fell in love with certain genres or certain personalities, and I enjoyed television, but I wasn't. I loved live theater more.
What were some of your other interests growing up as a kid?
Primarily sports. I was a pretty good little athlete, and I was an All-American boy, and I did well in school. I was sort of a president of the class kind of guy. Played baseball and football on a daily basis through my childhood. But I got a little injury my last game of Little League, and a little lower back issue. And my doctor said, we're going to put you in a brace for a year. No sports for a year. This is eighth grade, something like that. And I thought, how can I possibly live without playing ball every day? And I wandered into the Curtain Call Club, which was the little after-school theater group. And I thought, well, I'm not allowed to play ball. Maybe this will be distracting enough. And I auditioned for a play and got a role. And Miss Bowden, who her whole life was running that little after-school theater club, sort of liked me too, and cast me in some plays. And I got up on stage and said some lines and heard people laugh and clap. And I said, I like this. Every Easter, she would take a couple of students on a trip to New York to see some Broadway plays. And somehow my parents came up with $150 or whatever it was, and this 8th grade boy and 3 9th grade girls and Miss Bowden flew to New York, and we saw first The Sound of Music with Mary Martin, and Miss Bowden had written ahead to Mary Martin, and so we went backstage and met her after the show. The next night we saw The Miracle Worker with Patty Duke, and I flew away from New York with a teenage crush on New York City in a New York theater, and I fell in love with seeing those little kids on stage and thinking that could be me, and I thought, I think I'm going to be an actor. Well, a year later, the brace came off, and I sort of decided maybe I should get back into playing ball again, and I played 4 high school sports, and I was relatively successful at that. Stopped performing, but after school ended up at Penn State, where for some reason Joe Paterno couldn't use a 125-pound halfback, and probably wasn't going to make the basketball team either. So I again wandered into the theater, and once again got infatuated by that life and that world, and making stories and creating characters, and it was my college thrill to be once again back in that limelight. Now, I didn't have the guts to tell my dad I was going to be a theater major or going to turn into an actor, so I thought, well, let me see if there's something close where I can still spend a lot of time in the theater, and I became a broadcasting major. Not because, because I had a love for television, but because there was some performing involved, and it was more of a legitimate vocation. But my senior year, the final project, the final class was actually putting on a television show, a real practical course. And we were divided into teams, and each team had different assignments, and I was assigned to be, I think, the producer of a little production that this little group was making. And the final presentation was an actual live talk show about the subject matter that we had researched and done some B-roll for. And the guy who was assigned to direct it put the headsets on, and I noticed his hands were shaking a little bit, and suddenly he started to call shots. He said, "Ready, 2, take 3. No, wait a minute. No, I meant 4. No, wait, we only have 3 cameras. We get, I said, whoa, stop. Let's start over again. Let me try this. And I put the headsets on, rolled tape, and I started to bark the shots as quickly as I could, try to get the information out as efficiently as possible, try to get the whole team on board, anticipate what might happen next. If a mistake happened, get by it, move on to the next thing without dwelling on the mistake, knowing that might compound the problems. Kept my eye on the clock. And when it was over, I said, that was an adrenaline rush, and it went pretty well, but it seems familiar. And I thought, I know what that's like. It's the same feeling I had when I was a quarterback. It's that same feeling of working with a team and calling shots and calling things quickly and anticipating what might happen next, and avoiding getting bogged down on a mistake. We got to move on. And I thought, I think I could do this. And I got intrigued by that feeling. I got intrigued by that challenge, and I've been doing it ever since. And I get the same adrenaline rush in this room every week that same sense of this is a team, and we're going to try to win this game, and we're going to follow the script and follow the playbook and try our best, and I love that parallel, and that's served me well too.
Now, had the courses you were taking in school prepared you enough to be in that position? Had you taken editing courses so you see how the final project needs to come together? I mean, how did you know what to call and how to?
There was some of that, and it was an excellent faculty at Penn State, and they all came from the real world and had done some live multiple camera television studio work, and I had a sense of what it was. But when it came time to actually decide whether it should be camera 1 or camera 2, and whether we should zoom out or zoom in, or get a 2-shot or a single, that just all was kind of there by instinct, and that kind of sports mind instinct, and I kind of had that.
Mm. So did you know at that point directing was your bag, and that's what you wanted to
I
do?
still thought that I would be a performer of some sort, but as my career started and I began to hopscotch across the country at various television stations, I discovered that skill that I had and that affinity I had for calling live television was on the rare side, and that it was a valuable set of skills, and the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it, the more I was rewarded for it, the more I decided this may be what I should be doing.
Mm. You talk about your internship that you did before your senior year at KDKA.
It was during my senior year,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a great internship where it was a 10-week summer internship where every week I was in a different department. So I got to know a lot about how a television station works. And
this is a local station in Pittsburgh?
It's in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually KDKA Radio was the first radio station in the country. But KDKA Television was a fine local station, and having grown up near Pittsburgh, I knew all the personalities and was an avid follower. And to actually be inside that working operation was a thrill. That, in addition to the fact that it was just a good station that had this good internship, allowed me to be a little bit of a part of every one of those operations. It was small enough, and although it was unionized, it had some flexibility, so that I actually got to do some real work. And when I was in radio promotion, I got to actually write radio spots for promotional announcements for them. One week I was in television news, and over a weekend they ran out of reporters, and they sent me out with a camera crew to cover a story. And the only less than challenging week was when I was in television promotion. They were doing 1-minute spots for the new fall season, the new CBS season that was coming up. And they had hired someone to write some jingles and hired dancers to go out and go to landmarks in Pittsburgh and do little staged 1-minute spots that were singing and dancing about the new shows that were coming up. It was less than challenging for me because just before we started, they gathered the whole team and said, "Does anybody here drive a stick shift? We've rented a camper to be sort of the traveling dressing room for the dancers." And I said, "Yeah, I can drive a stick shift." So, well, that was how I spent the week, driving that little camper around Pittsburgh and carrying cases of Coke to the dancers in breaks, and it was a little less than thrilling. But the rest of that internship was really fine. And at the end of it, I said, "Well, what would it take for me to get back here?" And they said, "Well, go out in the real world and work at some local stations and get some practical experience. And when you're worked your way up to number 10 market level, give us a call." Well, I graduated from Penn State, and I worked at the Penn State station for 9 months or so, where I actually became a director 2 weeks into my stay there. The director of a local series that was an award-winning series about music and art for kids. The director quit, and I slid in, learned what I had to know about 30 seconds before I had to know it, and I was a bona fide director.
Did anyone show you the ropes at this point?
No.
About just,
No.
It was a natural.
Yeah, I just sort of guessed and took some risks and figured it out when I had to figure it out, and bluffed my way through some things, but I was a legitimate director. As a result, 9 months later, I said, well, I think I've learned everything there is to know about this kind of television. I'm going to move on. And I went to a little UHF station in San Jose, California.
You moved to California.
Picked up and moved. I had no idea what the station was or what it did or what kind of programming it had. And I showed up on a Saturday and drove out to the address. It was a tiny little shack in the middle of a cow pasture. I thought, I might have made a mistake here. I went to a motel and bought a TV guide and looked it up. I couldn't find the station at all. And, well, wait a minute, there it is, 12 noon. It's signed on at 12 noon on Saturdays, and it's signed on at 3 in the afternoon during the week. They didn't have enough programming for it. But it had about 6 people who do what 106 do here. So the 6 of us did a lot, and I learned a lot. And a year later, said I'm ready to move back to the big time.
Yeah. So you were doing a little bit of everything. You were directing, producing.
Oh yes,
On
that's
air.
correct. On air and audio and did camera work and set design and I learned a lot.
Did you have any? Did you want to be an on-air talent at this point? Did you still have the performing?
I still
bug?
had some of that, sure. But I was getting further and further away from that because of I was being asked to do things that were challenging and rewarding, and I was learning, and I thought, I think I could do this. But there was still a performing bug inside. There might still be.
We'll get there.
I called Pittsburgh, called KDKA, and I said, this is Don King. You told me to get some practical experience, and I've done that. I've worked at 2 different stations, and I'm ready for KDKA. Is there anything there for me? And the answer was, Don King, I'm sorry, I just can't place you. We get a lot of interns in here. I said, well, I'm the one that actually covered a news story one time. You ran out of reporters, and I went out and covered a story. No, I'm sorry. So I wrote all of those promotional announcements for radio, and I think some of them were really well received. He said, no. Wait a minute, Don King, are you the guy that drove the stick shift? I said, yeah, that was me. You were great at that. He said, I'll tell you what, we do have a job for you. What, could you come back and just work this summer and you'd be the producer of Pirate Baseball for our away games? I said, I'll be there. And that stick shift skill has led to my biggest break in television.
You never know what it's going to be.
Never know. And I drove back across country, and I spent the summer producing Pittsburgh Pirate games. And 3 years before, I was sitting out in the bleachers with binoculars saying, oh, I can see Bob Prince up there in the press box. There, yeah, that's Bob Prince, the play-by-play announcer for the Pirates. And there I was now, sitting right beside him and feeding him cards. And what a gigantic step that was, and such a remarkable moment for me.
What did you learn at that job that was a good takeaway for you for future jobs?
I learned that I wish I'd paid attention in Spanish class. When I was in college, I thought, well, the last thing I need is this second language. It's certainly not going to work in Spanish television. Every single job I've had, until this one perhaps,
No, it's okay. It's okay.
It's okay? Every single job, I would have been better at what I do if I had paid attention and learned Spanish, including traveling on a flight from Pittsburgh to Houston on a 3-hour flight on the team plane with Manny Sanguillen and Jose Pagan and Roberto Clemente sitting in front of me and beside me, speaking Spanish the entire time. And if I had been able to understand them and converse with them, I would have been able to convince them to come on the pregame show or gotten to know them in a way that would have been I would have been a better producer and director. And that holds true for every single one of my positions. There's been something where my Spanish would have helped. But I forgot the question.
No, it's just what were your takeaways?
Oh,
What were
the
the
takeaway,
lessons
yeah,
learned
yeah.
there that you didn't have
Yeah.
acquired already?
But after the Pirate season, I was asked to stay and asked to become a full-time producer-director there. It was just at the time when Westinghouse was pushing hard for a thing called primetime access. At the time, primetime for the network started at 7 o'clock. And they pushed for the FCC to insist that a half hour of that time at the beginning be devoted to local programming, because so the stations could serve their local audiences in a much more focused way. And most stations sort of wrote it off and bought syndicated game shows and stuff, but the Westinghouse stations were very particular about making it valuable. And we had a different kind of show that was locally produced every night. And I produced a show called About a Week, which was a weekly film magazine, sort of the beginning of that whole genre that led to Evening Magazine, which became syndicated, and a lot of stations did it. But it was a weekly look at the interesting places and people of Pittsburgh, and it was just a human interest kind of show that I got to shoot and write every week, and it was a valuable opportunity.
So you had a reporter's bug in you too, as well as the
Yes.
performer.
Yeah.
You enjoyed that kind of work
I did.
more than the sports coverage, or?
I loved it in a different way. It was my opportunity to really have a voice, and I got to write some things that I was proud of and still am, and it was well received, and it had a Pittsburgh flavor to it. And having grown up there, I knew a lot about a lot, and it helped.
I mean, it sounds like you could have stayed there as the local small town hero at KDKA.
That's
so
right. That's right.
What then brought you to WNEW in New York?
The New York part of it.
Mary Martin.
I still had that drive and that desire to get back here and to walk through this city, which has an electricity in the air and a sense of, my God, we're on this tiny island where so much news is happening and money's exchanges and art is created. It all happens here, and I still have that feeling too, that sense of excitement of being a part of all of this. And it was a reach, and it was a risk. And there were a lot of people who suggested, as you just did, that why not stay a big fish in this tinier city? Why go there where it'll be a sideways move, and you could get trapped and never get the opportunity to do what you want on such a free basis? But I thought, maybe I can, and it's worth the risk, and it's New York City, and I did it, and I'm so happy I did.
What was the opportunity?
It was to direct a daytime talk show called Midday Live, which was a 60, maybe a 90-minute local talk show. There aren't many of them left, but it was a guy who sat in a chair and interviewed people and took phone calls and talked about New York City. And the celebrity level was a little higher than we got in Pittsburgh, but it still was a local independent station, and not real high profile, but enough that I felt this is a risk worth taking. And it was my first opportunity to work with a 5-second delay, because it was the host's name was Lee Leonard, and because we took phone calls, we had to protect ourselves from somebody who might call up and say something obscene or inappropriate. And for some reason, I had the button that controlled the sensor. And the way it happened, it was all recorded on 2-inch videotape. Like in a regular 2-inch videotape machine, there's a reel here, and it runs through a record head and gets taken up here on the take-up reel. But for us to create this delay, we used two machines side by side. And so on this side, the tape rolled through the record head, but then rolled past the take-up head over to another machine and through a playback head on that machine. And then that take-up was way over on that side. So that's what the delay was. And if I hit the button, it would suddenly cut out the audio. For the first 6 months, it was never even close to an issue. And I was sort of finally learning my way in, and things went smoothly, and I was sort of enjoying this live multiple camera show. It was much like that show I directed at Penn State, and I was pretty good at it. One day, after 6 months in, Lee reached down and hit the button and said, "All right, caller, what do you have to offer?" Well, this caller started to spout profanities as loudly and as quickly as he could. "You mother, just what?" I thought, I've got this. I jumped forward and I hit the button, looked up. Sure enough, I had cut off the audio before it had managed to make it to the other playback head. And I saw Lee reach down and disconnect, so I knew we were safe. I reached out and hit the button again. Audio's back on again. I turned to the back row of producers back here, and I did one of these. As I'm doing one of these, with my back to the monitor wall, I hear Lee Leonard attempting to say, "Listen, folks, don't even attempt that. We're going to cut you off. That's not what this is for." But instead, Lee says, "Listen, fucks." Well, I'm standing here like this, and I hear Lee say, "Listen, fucks." Oh my God. I turned back, too late. Neither Lee nor I was fired for that event, but it made me a little more conscious of staying focused and concentrating on what happens up here as opposed to what happens back here. So even now, on Saturday Night Live, someone will say, "Oh, I watched the show from back here." I said, "I had no idea there was somebody else in this back row." I stay pretty intensely focused here.
Wow.
On the other hand, there's no delay for Saturday Night Live. I think once in its entire history has there been a delay in a show, but otherwise we take the risk and we're usually safe.
I mean, yeah, the ramifications, you could have gotten the whole station fined and shut down.
Correct, but for some reason we maybe it was because nobody was watching. I'm not sure.
In general, just the stakes of that, of being in New York with this bigger market. I mean, were there other things that made you nervous, or that you were worried about being able to accomplish, or having this skill or experience to do, coming from the smaller market in Pittsburgh?
I was brash, and I was full of myself, and I was convinced that I could do anything. And I sort of blindly took those risks. It wasn't long after that that I made some self-discovery, but that's another year down the line. Yeah.
Well, also while you were at NEW, was the time you came onto the David Susskind show?
David Susskind was a really fine producer of television programming in the 50s and 60s, and had his own talk show that was sort of a forerunner to a lot of the kind of programming we have now. He did controversial panel discussions and tackled delicate subjects, and did so in ways that were occasionally crossed the line, but it was done out of Channel 5, out of Metro Media, and I got to direct some of those too, and that was a big step as well. I mean, there's some big names that sat with David, and I didn't know any better, and just jumped in and called shots and followed the action and tried to avoid mistakes and managed to get a national syndicated show on my resume.
Were you still doing a little bit of everything, wearing a lot of hats at the
Yes,
station?
yes. And I also would raise my hand and say, hey, could I do a special, or could I do a documentary, or could I do this live coverage of the Medal of Honor winners? It's sort of a courtesy. WNEW would televise the Medal of Honor ceremony for the New York City Police Department. And what they had done up till that point was just capture the event where the mayor hands out medals to the cops who have done amazing things. And I wanted to do a little more, and sort of did some backstory taping and storytelling and recreations of events that these cops had won medals for, and turned it into a full-scale documentary. And
This is Gold on Blue?
yeah, that's right. I did two of them, Gold on Blue and More Than We Asked For, and wrote the theme song for both of them.
How did
And
you write a theme song? What did you know about writing
Nothing.
themes?
But I thought I could do anything. I was sure. I didn't know, but I thought I could come up with a melody and clever lyrics, and found a singer and got away with it.
Had you played music growing up?
I played the clarinet for about 6 days. I could read. I knew a little bit about. I knew enough to get by, and had some people help me.
You were shortly sure. That's what you were.
That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly it.
So I wanted to talk. I want to bring up also when you were at NEW, there were only 3 directors. Is that right?
That's right.
Who were doing all of these shows and all
That's
of the
right.
programming.
That's right.
So did you ever all get together and compare notes, or learn? Did one of them decide to mentor you, or what?
I have that regret. I never have had a mentor, and never had the opportunity to sit beside someone like an AD might, who works with a director over years and gets to know a style and gets to ask questions and gets to experiment, or a stage manager even, who works his way up through. I was a director 2 weeks into my career, and directors don't work with directors. There's only one director. I mean, other camera operators work with other camera operators, but you don't get the chance to work with someone or watch someone when you are the only director. And I might still be doing things wrong that nobody's told me about. But I've never had that opportunity. And the 3 of us at WNEW are way too busy with our own things to just even step in the control room and watch another show, let alone go out for drinks and talk about style or the personnel, or who we like to switch our shows.
Did you even have a sense that there was such a thing as a directing style at that point? I mean,
Yes, yes, primarily because people would tell me about other directors they had worked with.
what was the difference with you?
I've come to the conclusion that, in a simplistic way, that there are sort of 3 styles of directing television. One is the director who is a screamer. It can be kind of an intense, high level of stress room that we sit in now, and there are directors who are loud and demanding and sometimes abusive, and that can serve them in ways where a camera operator is saying, "Oh my God, I don't want him to yell at me. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to do exactly what he tells me to do, and I will not make a mistake because I don't want to be embarrassed." However, that director probably will not get what other things that camera operator has to offer, or any of his crew for that matter, but he might get exactly what he's asking for, because no one wants to be screamed at. There is another style that is the sort of the friendly, one of the guys directors who jokes on headset, and they go out for drinks afterwards with the whole crew, and he too that style might serve him in that they're all friends, and you don't want to let your friend down, and you'll sell a shot, and you'll do your best because you just love this guy, and you're going to go have drinks. But there's a danger there too, that you lose a little bit of that authority that you need. And the third style is kind of the one that I fell into, and that is the work comes first, and you can be low key. Certainly don't have to be abusive, but the job is what counts, and the work is what counts, and the shot is what counts, and I never have been one of the buddies of the rest of the crew. Partly for many years I was much younger, and partly because I just sensed that it was important to maintain a certain distance and a certain respect, major respect for your skills are what count here, but it's the quieter, more serious quarterback that I've become.
I like the football analogy.
Yeah. It might come up again.
Yeah, I think it will. So yeah, you are still, this is 1974 now when you moved to CBS. You're what, 27? Still very young to be
Right.
in this market. How did that move happen, and what was your role at CBS?
One of the executives at NEW moved to WCBS and asked me to join, and that was to direct a daytime morning talk show with Pat Collins, and it was just a step up and a more prestigious operation, and a good solid station. Once again, I was told, hey, you're not going to get to do shows like more than we asked for. You're not going to get to write songs. You go over there. You're going to be just directing a daytime talk show and nothing else. And I'm not so sure that's true. I might be able to do more. And I was able to do more. I directed that show for a while, but then in the same building, a network show called Camera 3 was produced. And it was really a fine weekend hour show about the arts. And some brilliant people were involved. And it was about the arts in the most eclectic way you can imagine. One week would be just a panel discussion about modernism, and the next week would be a documentary. Next week would be a performance of an orchestra, and a week after that would be a little staged a new one-act play written by a well-known playwright. And they saw something in me and asked me to do some work for them, and I got to do some impressive stuff with them that I'm still proud of, including total out in the woods field documentaries. One about a theater group that had gone to Oberlin College, and after they graduated, they formed their own company, and they rode a raft down the Mississippi River, stopping at small towns, putting up a tent and putting on live theater for these tiny little river towns that had never seen a live play before. And they would get back on the raft and slide down the river and we did a documentary about that raft trip. It was phenomenal.
What did you know about doing field producing, just
Well,
from your experience at KDKA?
That's right. That's right. And there was a similar. I did some similar work at NEW. Mm-hmm. And I also ended up doing a show called Channel 2, The People, which was very similar to the show in Pittsburgh. It was a series of little featurettes. So I knew a little bit about field work and loved that documentary life, and at least at that age, and got to follow this theater troupe. We also went to Jamaica and did a show about reggae music in 1974, and that was before reggae was even heard much, or certainly no one knew where it started or what it was about, and we were in jungles of Jamaica and following all little Rastafarian groups, and it was that was a pretty special trip too.
Did you do your own scouting and location scouting?
Yes.
And you did all of that?
Yeah, well, I had a Jamaican guide.
That you found?
Yeah, and we got shot at.
You were shot at?
Oh yeah. I was not hit. But
and didn't deter you, or?
No, it just seemed like it was part of the necessary adventure, and it was an adventure, and it was a documentary that when we got back, I talked them into letting me narrate it, and I'm proud of that too.
There's the performer.
That's right. Yeah, I got to sneak it in a little bit.
With all of these different styles between the staged theatrical segments and the sit-down interview segments and these fields, do you have to switch gears? Do you have to approach directing them in a different way? Is that in your purview at that point?
It's a different set of skills, but the attitude is the same, and that work ethic is the same, and I was still the same height, so it all kind of melded together, and I felt I could do anything, and I was wrong, but I did it. And
were there any mishaps or things that fell down?
I was pretty lucky all the way through to this interview. I've been fortunate enough not to have many drawbacks. I've been blessed.
So 1975, another step.
Big step.
Talk about what happened.
I was directing the Pat Collins show. The guest that morning was a performer named Mike Douglas. Now, there were years when I would say Mike Douglas, and people say, "Oh, I love that show." Now, most people say, you mean Michael Douglas, the actor? I didn't know he had a talk show. I said, no. There was a difference. Mike Douglas. Of course, now a lot of people don't even know who Michael Douglas is. He's sort of semi-retired too. But Mike Douglas was sort of the Ellen of his time. He had a daytime syndicated talk show that was very, very successful, and it was a lovely 90-minute show of performance and interview and celebrity gossip, and it was the Ellen of its time. Well, Mike, as a guest on that show, had come from the show's done in Philadelphia. He'd come to New York with his executive producer, a guy named Jack Riley, and Jack watched from the control room. And after the show came up to me and said, "Don, the director we have in Philadelphia has got some medical issues, and just in case, would you ever be able to come to Philadelphia and fill in for him?" I said, "Whew, Mike Douglas show, absolutely! I would love that." And
you'd watch the show?
Oh, definitely, especially when I was home sick from school, and it was. Its competition was Merv Griffin, and Dinah Shore had a show at the same time, but they were big, and that was in the days of 3 commercial channels, so it was seen and known everywhere, and I knew it well. 2 weeks after that conversation, Jack Riley called me up and said, "Our director just went into the hospital. Is there any chance you can come down and do 2 weeks of shows?" And it just so happened I could, vacation time or something. We were down for some reason. I said, "Okay, I can be in Philadelphia tomorrow." He said, No, this is the 2 weeks we're doing the show live on the beach in Miami. I said, "Okay, I'll fly to Miami." Not knowing how far over my head I was, not knowing how intensely complicated that is, not knowing that it was a giant outdoor live remote with multiple cameras and big setups and circus acts and people that were staged in the sand and a giant audience in bleachers. So I flew to Miami and did those shows. I sort of, once again, learned what I had to know 30 seconds before I had to know it. I faked my way through, and at the end of the end of the 2 weeks, they said, just in case our director doesn't make it, would you be interested in doing this full time? And I said, okay. And I did. And he didn't come back. And 2 weeks later, I was packing up and moving to Philadelphia and directing this gigantic, big-time variety show.
Yeah. Talk about working with Mike. What was your interaction with him, and what was his input on the look of the show?
Mike was the sweetest, most charming guy you can imagine, and he didn't have a competitive sense. He didn't have a star's attitude. He just was a sweet guy with a pretty voice who had stumbled into the right thing at the right time, which made it so much easier for all of us. And quite frankly, I think that's partly what made him good. Being the host of a talk show is a tough dichotomy, because on the one hand, you know that the show exists because of you. Your name, it's the Mike Douglas Show. Your name is on that marquee, and people watch because of you. But to be good at it, you've got to give up the spotlight. You've got to make your guest feel comfortable and important, and you've got to make him funny and enjoy his performance. Well, Mike, as a singer, loved it when somebody knocked it out of the park as a performer on the show. He loved the finest singers in the world to be on his show. A comedian, Mike was occasionally a clever, witty guy, but he loved it when a comedian would make fun of him, and that's a rare balance. And there have been a lot of bright, sharp talk show hosts who didn't have that kind of ability to give up the spotlight, but Mike did, and that made it easy for everybody. Certainly made it easier for me, and I loved that time. Mike also had a part of the show was called a guest host, so that one of the celebrities would be on every show for the entire week. So we got to work with some remarkable people for the entire week of shows, and
John Lennon and right.
I took over just a few months after John Lennon and Yoko Ono co-hosted, but I got to spend a week with Red Skelton and Jackie Gleason and Jerry Lewis and some of the finest singers and crooners and Catskill comedians that you can imagine. And I, in retrospect, think, man, I wish I had been a little more mature to know how special this was. But I still feel blessed that I got a chance to spend those 3 years with Mike.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about part of this trial by fire of the things you didn't know as you were embarking on them? What is your role in directing a variety show like that? How much interaction do you have with the host, the staging, the blocking? What are all of the things that are going on in that circus?
Mm-hmm. Initially, I take over a show that's already got its moving parts, and my job is to reproduce what's been done in the past. And that's the case with lots of shows I've taken over, that I'm just supposed to slip in and make it as seamless a transition as possible. But then it comes time to make a set change, or change the graphics, or music, or some of the basic blocking of any show. And then I become more involved in all the production details, and we went through several revampings of the look of Mike, and so I learned a lot about set design and lighting and staging and live bands and live musical performances, and how best to shoot live musical performances, and it was because we did it every day. We did
Yeah.
90 minutes every day. I got a chance to get better at a lot of little things through those years.
What
And
were some specific changes you did make?
we would revamp the entire structure of how they sat and how things moved and where we would stage musical acts and where we would do little sketches and so all of that had to do with should Mike come out this door here or should the band play first or should the announcer be on camera or so all of that. All of that would get discussed and get weighed against the long-range value of the show, and so I got a chance to do a little bit of everything.
Were there memorable episodes or memorable challenges that you recall from those days?
In that show,
Yeah.
I think we often took the show on the road, and we would do a week of shows in Las Vegas, and a week of shows in California, and we would do individual interviews at people's homes. We do a lot of at-home withs, and that was a separate set of skills, and that had its own separate set of challenges. And suddenly, I'm working with California crews, not just my little tiny Philadelphia family, and the L.A. crews are a little different in their demands and their schedules and their regulations and so I learned a lot about that too because I still was a kid and they were some old crusty pros there that weren't real pleased with working with a kid.
How'd you win them
kid.
over? Just
I think it had to do with respect and work ethic and a sense of confidence that I'm going to be willing to say I don't know how to do this or be willing to say can you help but at the same time make it clear that when it comes down to it I'm the director. I'm going to have to make the final decision, but I'm more than wide open to what you have to offer, and that even serves me here.
Is that a difficult balance for you ever then or now, the balance between the humility and the graciousness and the someone has to call what's happening? Someone needs to be the authority figure and say, it's my way.
I think by this point, I'm pretty comfortable in that balance and still manage to maintain most of the openness, most of the respect, the respectfulness, and yet the confidence that it's going to be my decision.
Were you there for the Legionnaire's disease outbreak on the Mike Douglas show?
I think I was, yeah.
During the bicentennial celebration?
Yes.
You were there?
I was there.
Do you recall anything about
I
that?
don't.
Okay.
I remember it was Philadelphia. I remember it was a big deal. I don't think it had any direct impact
on the show.
on us or any of our people.
I want to bring up something else. The Mike Douglas show. This was the first show, I believe, that you won your first national Emmy. Could you talk about what impact that had on you personally in your career?
Definitely. Well, I was nominated for, I think, 13 New York local Emmys, and didn't win any of them. Which, by the way, is an interesting paradox. You feel I felt so full of myself and proud, and my first time I was nominated for one of those documentaries you mentioned. I think it was More Than We Asked For, and I was nominated. The show was nominated. I was nominated as a writer. I was nominated as a producer or a director. There were three, and I flew my parents in, and we rented a limousine and dressed in tuxedos, and it's a cool event, and it's almost like the big time. It's not televised, but it's a big banquet and sit around tables with fancy tablecloths and flowers in the middle, and there's a guy up in the front who's on a microphone and announces names, and all three times my name got announced as one of the nominees, but none of those three times did it get announced as a winner. And after it was over, that was one of the worst senses of defeat and disappointment I've ever felt. I thought, oh my God, I'm such a loser. And I learned, therefore, to balance that high and low of being nominated as opposed to winning or losing an Emmy. But I got nominated for, I think the first year, one of the Mike Douglas shows, and I didn't win. I was better able to handle it. It's an even bigger event. It's the daytime national Emmys. But the second year, I won. And overnight, I became a jerk. Overnight, I started to treat people differently, and they treated me differently, and the producer would come up with an idea for staging something. I'd say, whoa, wait a minute. I want an Emmy. I think we'll do it my way. And I think God invented television just so I could show off in television. And I was too young to put it all together, too young to be gracious about it all, and it came to me that, in retrospect, that fame is probably one of the worst drugs we have, and it eats away at you, and you want more of it, and it changes how you think of yourself and how you treat others. And but a couple years afterwards, I volunteered to be a judge on one of the blue ribbon panels for Emmys. And at the time, it was a tough process, because what would happen is, over a weekend, the whole group would go to a hotel room or an office and just sit there in front of a VHS machine watching show after show after show. And you're just sitting in office chairs, and you just sit there with this group, and one finishes, they put in the next one. And I would sit there thinking, oh my God, I don't think I can watch another show. I certainly can't be objective about judging the directing or whatever. I think it was mostly directing panels I was on. I can't be objective about it. Just show me any show that'll keep me awake. And then afterwards, I would check off the show that kept me awake. You know, I wasn't really judging the directing skills or isolating that particular responsibility. I was looking at what I enjoyed watching. And when I started to think, maybe this process isn't quite as clear-cut and as genuine as I thought. Now, wait a minute, what's that show I won for? Oh, Mike Douglas. Oh, yeah, it was a show where Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire came on the show. Mike convinced them to come on the show and talk about old-time Hollywood. And it's the first time they'd ever done that in public, the two of them together. And it was a fascinating show. Had nothing to do with the directing. It had to do with these two great guys talking about their experiences in Hollywood, and Mike leading them through those stories. And I thought, you know something? A relatively bright monkey could have directed this. You just point the cameras at whoever's talking. That's it. And I realized that maybe the process didn't mean that God created television for me. Maybe it was just I was fortunate enough to be a part of a team that was involved in this show. And I had this great statue. I'm going to keep it, and I'm proud of it, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm a brilliant director. It just means I was lucky. And that attitude I have maintained, fortunately, straight through my experiences here. Because I have been lucky enough to win some statues for this show. And I know it's only because I am part of this team with brilliant writers and brilliant performers and brilliant craftsmen who put together a show that is a high-profile, show-off show. And I stay out of the way, or at least capture the action in a way that doesn't get in the way, and I get gold statues for it. I'm proud of that, but I know that it's not a sign that I'm a much better director than most.
That TV wasn't just invented for you.
Sure, that's correct.
Show off.
That's correct.
I want to move to the next big step was NBC, right? This new show that was, I assume you helped create and initiate, which was America Alive.
America
Could you talk
Alive.
about how that came about?
the original producer of the Mike Douglas Show, who hired me at Mike, had since left, gone on to do other things, and was starting an NBC version he went on to start Good Morning America. Then he moved to NBC to start a little later in the day, sort of midday version of Good Morning America. And and America Live was that show, and it was done 2 flights down, and it was an inventive kind of a New York loft set with a live audience built into the loft, and a little staging area and a little talking area, and a little balcony with some more people up above. It was really a fresh look. He filled it with some a whole cast of characters who had special skills in areas of life, including Bruce Jenner and Rona Barrett, and a guy named Linkletter, not Linkletter, but his son Jack Linkletter, hosted the show. And it was, I was involved in the design and the look and feel and the flow of that show, and America Alive was alive for about 8 months. It did not catch on, it did not do well, and for the first time I was out of work and struggling and thinking, what now?
Is you had left the Douglas Show for this job?
Correct.
And moved back to New York. Not an
That's
easy
right.
move.
That's right.
So another leap of faith, but this one didn't pan out as the others.
Not initially, no.
So what did you do? And why do you think it didn't work?
I don't know. I don't know why shows. Along those same lines, about a year later, I got a call from an executive I'd worked with before from California. He said, can you come out to California and direct a pilot for us? It's a show called Entertainment Tonight. And I said, sure. And we spent about a month putting together this flashy pseudo news show with flying graphics and different original sets. And a month later, I came back to New York and started looking for work and had something lined up. He called, said the show sold. He was working at Paramount. He said the show sold, and we'd love you to come out here and direct it. And I stopped and I said, no, wait a minute. This is a half-hour news show, 6 days a week, and the stories are nothing but show business stories. So how long could that show last?
You never know.
Well, 40 years later, I guess I misjudged. I said, no, I got something lined up here. So I said, no, thank you.
But with both of those experiences, it sounds like it's not a show that you're stepping into that's been on the air for so long, like a mainstay like the Douglas Show.
Right,
this is something you have more creative input into, perhaps.
Right.
Is that what enticed you to be part of both of those? And how much did you contribute?
Definitely. On the other hand, I think both experiences proved to me that I'm not as good at creating as I am at managing or just calling the action as it happens. And the ability to rethink and start from scratch is. I was sure it was part of my repertoire. I thought for sure I could do that as well as I can shoot 3-pointers. But I think in the long run, I'm not as good at that as I thought I was, and that might have something to do with it. On the other hand, Entertainment Tonight has done all right.
Yeah. What do you remember contributing to the pilot and putting the pilot together?
Oh, I contributed a great deal of how the show was paced and looked. However, once it got on the air, it had a completely different flavor to it, and I don't take credit for any part of it. In fact, most of the cast changed too by the time it went on the air. and they went on the air live. We put it together over a period of time, and I remember watching it thinking, maybe that's a little bit over my head too. It was probably in the long run better that I didn't take that opportunity.
Yeah. So America Live sizzles.
Right.
Entertainment Tonight, you decide it's a bad bet. So now what? You're now in New York again, but looking for work.
Yeah, I met someone in the street who had worked on the Mike Douglas show, who was now working on Good Morning America, and they were considering a directorial change, and I said, sure, I can get up at 4 in the morning, and so I did for the next 21 years. Directed Good Morning America for 7, and CBS This Morning, which became the early show, for another 14, and found a world that where my skill set was sort of ideal for just the ability to stay focused and put 2 hours of television on the air every morning and do it with efficiency and had a good 21 years.
I want to take a quick break.
Sure.
Let's cut for now.